Hello guys, and I'm Comrade Darkslayer. And today in this video, I'm going to be presenting to you the truth of 9/11. And I want to tell you guys the truth of 9/11 and what really happened. And today I'm going to tell you the truth of 9/11 and why it's a false flag. And today in this video, I'll be presenting to you overwhelming evidence of why 9/11 was an inside job. And I'm going to be showing you powerful evidence that 9/11 was a false flag to take our civil liberties and go to the Middle East for oil for the military-industrial complex and all that stuff. But people need to know the truth of 9/11 as a whole. You know, it was an event that got us in the Middle East. It was based on lies that got us in the Middle East for oil and for the military-industrial complex. $1 million were spent on the Pentagon, and the war was just for money. And 9/11 was also an event that took our civil liberties, took our freedoms away. They literally took our rights away during 9/11. Lost all our freedoms that day. And they literally used the Patriot Act to spy on us and use espionage to spy on American citizens. The Patriot Act and all other terrible legislation was used to use surveillance on the American people. That's how bad 9/11 was, really. And I want the American people to know the truth of 9/11 and what really happened. So today in this video, I'll be showing you what really happened and why, and who caused and why, what was the motive behind it, and why it needed to happen, that they wanted it to happen, that they let it happen. It was an event that changed people's lives forever. I'm going to show you what really happened and what really transpired at that day and why it was a drill. And I'm going to show you overwhelming evidence of why this is a drill. I'm going to also show you a lot of overwhelming evidence that this was like a false flag drill that was running that happened that day. So here we go. On the truth of 9/11. And I'll be showing you evidence of war games exercises, and a FEMA drill. And I'm going to be showing you evidence of war games exercises, and how the shadow government deep state hijacked the war games. And they used the war games drill. Evidence of why the deep state / shadow government hijacked the war games exercises and used the war games exercises drill to use for 9/11. And there were 4 war games exercises on 9/11. Probably more. There were probably more war games. And the war games are real. And the war games are real. And the war games were omitted in the congressional record too. So just to let you know, by the way. And there was also a FEMA drill. There was actually a FEMA drill before 9/11. So think about that. There was a FEMA drill during 9/11, during the day of 9/11. And there was a FEMA drill that happened before 9/11. There was literally a FEMA drill cleanup team before 9/11 even happened. Let that sink in. I mean, take that for what you will. And you also have the buildings. And the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. And there's overwhelming of Building 7 why it was brought down, the suspicious. And I'm going to be showing you overwhelming evidence of why 2 World Trade Centers, the 2 Twin Towers, were brought down by controlled demolition. And there's explosives, overwhelming evidence of explosives, a lot of explosives. And I'm going to be showing you evidence of why Building 7 was taken down, why Building 7 was brought down by controlled demolition. And there was explosives, overwhelming evidence of explosives, why that needed to be taken down, why they want to take that down on purpose. So it's really strange. A lot of overwhelming evidence. A lot of explosions, a lot of bombs, a lot of overwhelming evidence of that. There's a lot of explosions, a lot of bombs, overwhelming evidence of that. Overwhelming evidence of that, overwhelming. I'm going to be showing that to you now. So here we go. Here it is.
What's this other jet doing? Holy fuck!
Oh my god! Oh my god! Jesus fucking Christ!
Don't touch it.
Oh my god!
I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
This was clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
We made it outside, we made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
They
detonated,
were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running. Just ran up, and then you just sort of this cloud of shit chasing you down. Just ran up West Street. We're not running. I jumped behind a battalion car, I hit under the car, it was swinging.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
World Trade Center Building Number 7. On September 11, 2001, it was one of the casualties of the terrorist attacks on that horrific day. Building 7's sudden and shocking collapse has been overshadowed by the fate of the Twin Towers. But from an engineering standpoint, it is the greater mystery.
We were surprised that Tower 7 collapsed. We being the team that investigated what occurred on that day. There was some damage to Tower 7 caused by the debris that hit it from Tower 1, but the damage was certainly not similar in scope or magnitude to that caused by the aircraft hitting Towers 1 and 2.
The only positive aspect of this building's demise is that it fell 7 hours after the 2 main towers. Everyone had been evacuated, and even though the 47-story building collapsed in on itself in under 10 seconds, no one was killed.
World Trade Center 7 was completed in 1987. It had approximately 1.8 million square feet, 47 stories, and was roughly 600 feet tall. Each of the floors was approximately 40,000 square feet, which is roughly the size of a football field and equal to the size of the floor plate on each of the towers.
The building was a good building. It was soundly designed. It would still be standing if not for 9/11. And it was state-of-the-art at the time, absolutely.
I lost my husband.
My son.
My uncle.
My nephew. September 11th, 2001.
Most people don't know a third tower fell that day.
The government says fire brought it down.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
I, along with 1,400 other architects and engineers,
have found the government's conclusion to be physically impossible.
Impossible.
We need the truth about what happened that day.
Go to rememberbuilding7.org.
Why it fell, why it matters, and what you can do.
Do you believe that the government had anything to do with the attack of 9/11? Do you believe in a conspiracy in terms of the attack of 9/11?
No, but I do believe that it is the first time in history that fire has ever melted steel. I do believe that it defies physics for the World Trade Center Tower 7, Building 7, which collapsed in on itself. It is impossible for a building to fall the way it fell without explosives being involved. World Trade Center 7. World Trader 1 and 2 got hit by planes. 7, miraculously, the first time in history, steel was melted by fire. It is physically impossible.
And who do you think is responsible for that?
I have no idea. But to say that we don't know that it imploded and it was an implosion and a demolition is beyond ignorant. Look at the films, get a physics expert here from Yale, from Harvard, pick the school. It defies reason.
Let's get one. Let's get one, because that
I would do it.
Is the unthinkable.
It is the unthinkable. But imagine if somebody could convince you of that, could prove it to you, Elizabeth, just 7.
Did you know that a third tower fell on 9/11? At approximately 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds from normal office fires, according to the government's final report.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
Later, the government finally admitted that Building 7 collapsed at the rate of free fall after trying to deny it. So what's wrong with a building in free fall? What is free fall?
It's just like taking your car keys out and just dropping them. That's how fast the building came down, for over 100 feet.
This is high school physics.
A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system without it being blown up.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
Saw the big hubbub going on around Building 7. Walked around it. I saw a hole. I didn't see a hole bad enough to knock a building down, though. I saw, yeah, there was definitely fire in the building, but I didn't hear any you know, I mean, maybe this is movie crap. I didn't hear any creaking, or I didn't hear any indication that it was going to come down. And all of a sudden, the radios exploded, and everybody started screaming, "Get away, get away, get away from it!" And I was like a deer in the headlights. And I look up, and I think I remember pretty clearly the two guys that I knew were on the transit radio. I don't know if those tapes are out there, but I can try and look for them and show you exactly what I'm talking about. But it was that moment, you know, get away. And I looked up, and it was nothing I would ever imagine seeing in my life. You know, the thing started peeling in on itself, and I mean, there was an umbrella of crap 7 feet over my head that I just stared at. And somebody grabbed my shoulder, and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you're hearing thum, 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 thum. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it, you know. I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down, and running away from that sucked. That's one of the things that I live with all the time, and I don't know, but that didn't sound like just a building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did, and a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
The Red Cross rep was like, he goes over and he says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building, they just said bringing a building down.
All I can attest to is that by noon or 1 o'clock, they told us we had to move from that triage site up to Pace University, a little further away, because Building 7 was going to come down or being brought down.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department. And they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys. Sorry.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up.
So we're like, okay, you know, we'll take their word for it. You know, we'll stay behind the line. And he went over and he talked to one of the, through all the commotion, he goes over and he asked one of the Red Cross, or one of the firefighters, what was going on. I guess, I don't know if he got an answer or not. He came back over with his hand over the radio, and it sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Just in the last few seconds, another building, building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers, has collapsed. This is no small building, as you can see, at 47 stories. It would stand out in most American cities.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and you know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was. Well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and you know, it was horrifying. And then, you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You know, we were in shock, and then the
high-rise buildings simply do not collapse due to fire. There has never been until 9/11 an experience where a high-rise building that was steel frame completely collapsed. There have been fires burned longer in similar structures without any collapse.
In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In my previous career as a firefighter, normally you'd never be afraid to go into a Type 1 building because they're not combustible, and you would just charge.
On September 13th, the United States government declares that it has overwhelming evidence that bin Laden is responsible for the attacks. The Taliban offers to hand over Osama bin Laden if the United States can provide evidence.
Our position in this regard is that if America have evidence and proofs, they should produce it, and we are ready for the trial of Osama bin Laden in the light of evidence.
Are you willing to hand Osama bin Laden to the United States or not?
No. Without evidence, no.
September 23rd, 2001.
The Secretary of State said the administration would soon be able to document its case in public against the Al-Qaeda network and Osama bin Laden.
And I think it'll be persuasive.
By the next day, the White House was already backpedaling.
But is there any plan to present public evidence so that, the average citizen, not just Americans, but people all over the world, can understand the case against bin Laden?
Well, I think as Secretary Powell said, there's hope to do that and to do so in a timely fashion over some course of time. But I think the American people also understand that there are going to be times when that information cannot immediately be forthcoming, and the American people seem to be accepting of that.
It seems as though you're asking everyone to trust you.
This information has yet to be provided to the public. Instead of taking credit, bin Laden denies involvement in the attacks 3 times. December 13th, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden describes the attacks along with Khaled al-Harbi. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt. International establishments question the authenticity of the tape. December 26th, 2001. A Taliban official claims that he has attended the funeral of Osama bin Laden. The next day, a video believed to be recorded on November 19th is broadcast, in which bin Laden praises the attack, but takes no responsibility. The next bin Laden video would not appear until October 29th, 2004, days before the presidential election. The video is described as the clearest claim of responsibility for 9/11. And when questioned why bin Laden's most wanted poster does not indict him for 9/11, the chief of investigative publicity for the FBI, Rex Toome, replied,
9/11 is not mentioned on bin Laden's most wanted poster because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11. Clearly, I couldn't really believe what I had just heard, so I repeated it. And he said, yes, that is correct. The FBI has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11.
What evidence do they have? 2 bags belonging to Muhammad Atta checked in at Portland Airport but failed to make Flight 11 at Boston, containing a 757 video tour and flight manual, an Arab-English dictionary, a handheld flight computer, a Quran, and his will. Why would Atta take his will onto a plane that would be destroyed in a fiery inferno? Marwan al-Sheikh's rental car, discovered at Logan Airport, containing an Arabic flight manual, an airport restricted area pass, and documents from Huffman Aviation. Nawaf al-Hazmi's rental car, discovered at Dulles Airport, containing Muhammad Atta's instructions, a check for a flight school in Phoenix, 4 drawings of a 757 cockpit, a knife, and maps of Washington and New York. Satam al-Sakami's passport, discovered below the Twin Towers.
Well, Dan, not far from here, a passerby found the passport of one of the hijackers.
How does a passport fly out of a man's pocket through a 400-mile-per-hour airplane crash, survive 9,000 gallons of jet fuel, and land intact on a sidewalk 1,000 feet below? Mahed Maked and Nawaf al-Hazmi's ID cards discovered in the wreckage at the Pentagon. An ID, Saeed al-Ghamdi's passport, Ahmed al-Nami's driver's license, passport photos, and a business card found in Shanksville. The list goes on. A former high-level intelligence official commented to New Yorker magazine, "Whatever trail was left deliberately for the FBI to chase."
They used hundreds of different payphones and cell phones, often with prepaid calling cards that are extremely difficult to trace. And they made sure that all the money sent to them to fund their attacks was wired in small amounts to avoid detection.
Small amounts? Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, the director of the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the ISI, was reported to have wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta in August 2001. This transfer was facilitated by Saeed Sheikh, the man who allegedly kidnapped and murdered Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, who is investigating the ties between the ISI and Islamic militants.
And the Pakistanis, of course, if you know your history, have only been a couple of degrees of separation away from the so-called Al-Qaeda hijackers.
The ISI has had a long-standing relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, dating back to the 1980s with the establishment of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which would evolve into Al-Qaeda.
I focus in on the wire transfer that General Mahmoud Ahmed wired to Muhammad Atta right before 9/11. That's pretty crucial because General Mahmoud Ahmed was actually meeting with key Washington, D.C. insiders, Senator Bob Graham, Porter Goss, the future director of CIA, on the morning of 9/11. And he has a relationship not only with the CIA, but with Dick Armitage at State Department, Mark Grossman at State Department.
Yes. Are you aware of the reports at the time that ISI chief was in Washington on September 11 and on September 10th, $100,000 was wired from Pakistan to these groups here in this area? And why he was here, was meeting with you or anybody in the administration?
I have not seen that report, and he was certainly not meeting with me. Yes?
In the White House transcript of this exchange, which is delivered to the press, the information about the ISI is censored. Bob Graham and Porter Goss will later co-head a joint inquiry which publicly claims that the Bush administration received absolutely no intelligence that could have prevented the attacks. The meeting begins at 8 a.m. over breakfast at the Capitol building and lasts through Flight 175's impact with the South Tower. During his visit, which began on September 4th, Ahmed would also meet with the present CIA director, George Tenet. A month later, after reports of the transfer between himself and Atta, Mahmoud Ahmed retires from the ISI. The 9/11 Commission report will later conclude that they saw no evidence that any foreign government or foreign government official supplied any funding. The Commission decided not only to omit the information, but to deny it entirely.
On page 172 of your report, the 911 report, you state, quote, "The U.S. government has not been able to determine the origin of the money used in the 911 attacks. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance," end quote. how can you state that the question of who bankrolled the deaths of 3,000 American people on September 11th is, quote, of little practical significance?
Because it costs so little money. That's the awful thing about it. It costs less than $500,000. That's why it was so hard to trace. We were able to find pieces of the $500,000, but it came in very small pieces.
And you said earlier $500,000 to do the 9/11 operation. Well, we know that $100,000 was wired to Muhammad Atta directly from the head of Pakistani ISI.
Well, I'm not aware of $100,000. But the Pakistan, I think, is the most dangerous country in the world.
Why was there such a vested interest in covering up the transaction between the ISI and Muhammad Atta?
And let's talk about that wire transfer, because Governor Kaine had no basis for denial, because the FBI and the Wall Street Journal confirmed the General Mahmoud Ahmed wire transfer I'm talking about. But the 9/11 Commission deliberately said that funding is not important and assigning blame is not important to them, but it is to us.
As if their funding was not suspicious enough, a number of hijackers reportedly trained at U.S. military bases.
As hard as this is to believe that two of the alleged terrorists involved in what happened on Tuesday may have attended school.
February 27th, 1933. At 9:27 p.m., a massive fire erupts inside the Reichstag, Germany's House of Parliament. Marinus van der Lubbe, a 24-year-old half-blind Dutch communist, is found half-naked behind the building and arrested on sight. After an interrogation and trial, Marinus is beheaded 3 days before his 25th birthday. Historians argue that Gestapo police entered the Reichstag through an underground tunnel and soaked the building with chemicals and gasoline, with Marinus van der Lubbe arriving later to start the fire with his shirt. Later that evening, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring meet in front of the flaming debris to round up a list of communists and execute them that same night. The next day, Hitler passed the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended most civil liberties and banned publications considered unfriendly to the Nazi cause. Hitler then takes Nazi control of the German parliament, passes the Enabling Acts, and begins his invasion of neighboring countries, starting with Poland. September 11th, 1941. Ground is broken at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, and construction begins. December 7th, 1941. The Imperial Japanese Navy attacks the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Hawaii. 2,403 Americans are killed, and an additional 1,178 are wounded. Although Roosevelt received multiple warnings indicating that an attack was imminent, he withholds this information and informs his commanders that negotiations with Japan are underway.
The Pearl Harbor Investigating Committee hears the testimony of Admiral Kimmel, who was Navy head at Pearl Harbor at the time of the Jap sneak attack.
We needed one thing. That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information.
A number of government investigations concluded that there was considerable foreknowledge of the Japanese plans. Roosevelt declares December 7th an unprovoked and dastardly attack, an act of war between the United States and Japanese Empire, and asks for carte blanche to enter World War II. May 8, 1945. Nazi Germany formally surrenders to the World War II Allied forces. Beginning that month, the United States military begins recruiting the top rocket scientists from Nazi Germany. The project, known as Operation Paperclip, eventually included more than 100 individuals for the purpose of advancing America's technology. July 16, 1945. The Manhattan Project, a joint effort between the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada to develop strategic nuclear weapons, culminates with a detonation in New Mexico, nicknamed the Trinity Test. The detonation was equal to 19 kilotons of TNT and left a crater of radioactive glass 10 feet deep and 1,000 feet wide. A variation of this bomb would later be used on 2 cities. Hiroshima, Japan. 70,000 people are instantly killed as a result. The bomb completely obliterated 1 square mile and started fires across almost 5 square miles, leaving almost nothing at the epicenter. 75% of the city was either heavily damaged or destroyed, and approximately 100,000 people died from radiation poisoning in the years that followed. Nagasaki, Japan. 40,000 are killed and almost 30,000 are injured. The bomb destroyed 1 square mile and started fires almost 2 miles out. In the end, the Manhattan Project cost nearly $2 billion and employed more than 130,000 people at 3 different facilities across 3 different states. Research and design at Los Alamos National Laboratory and 2 sites built explicitly for the project. Uranium enrichment at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and plutonium enrichment at the Hanford site in Washington State. At the time, it was the largest construction effort in United States history, and the entire operation was supervised by General Leslie Groves of the Army Corps of Engineers. Groves used a practice known as compartmentalization, which limits intelligence to a need-to-know basis and often leaves those working on the project in the dark. Entire communities and natives were literally packed up and moved out. Although tens of thousands of people were directly affected, the Manhattan Project was kept a secret. So secret that Vice President Harry Truman only became aware of it after President Roosevelt's death. General Groves himself claimed, "Compartmentalization of knowledge was the very heart of security. Each man should know everything he needed to know and do his job, and nothing else." To this day, much of the Manhattan Project remains classified. November 21st, 1945. The Nuremberg trials, an international tribunal to convict the Nazi Party of war crimes, commences in Germany. 12 are executed. The rest are imprisoned, acquitted, or commit suicide before trial.
And here is the presidential jet, U.S. Air Force number 1, printed on the side, and the crowd begins its cheer, which you can't hear over the...
now turning on to Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the trademark. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
The President of the United States is dead.
Swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
August 4th, 1964. 2 American ships report that they are being attacked by North Vietnamese military units in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam. President Lyndon Baines Johnson immediately declares it an unprovoked attack and orders retaliatory strikes against North Vietnam, asking Congress to authorize action in Southeast Asia. Believing Johnson's claims, legislators act quickly, giving him carte blanche to use military forces in Vietnam. However, documents declassified from the National Security Agency in 2005 confirm that the attack never took place. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution was signed by President Johnson on August 10, 1964. This decree was the doorway through which the United States officially walked into Vietnam.
In March 1968, while on a not very routine mission, a very hard, bitterly fought search and destroy mission in a free fire zone of South Vietnam, a place called Pinkville near Quang Ngai in the northern part of Vietnam, the Army says that a platoon led by First Lieutenant William L. Calley Jr., a 26-year-old combat veteran, the Army claims that they murdered 109 Vietnamese villagers, mostly women and children. Kelly doesn't necessarily dispute that fact. What he says is, I was following orders.
September 2000. The Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank whose members include Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Jeb Bush, releases their report entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. The report calls for a massive overhaul of the United States military and encourages fighting and winning multiple theater wars. They declare that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 17 of the project's participants would later take positions in the next White House administration. By the afternoon of 9/11, Osama bin Laden was officially being blamed for the attacks, though a number of international figures would question the United States version of events, including Egyptian President Mubarak and General Hamid Gul, the former head of Pakistani intelligence, who stated that 9/11 was pulled off by the Israeli intelligence service. On September 16th, bin Laden officially denies responsibility on Al Jazeera television. Regardless, Bush claims he wants bin Laden dead or alive, and the CIA is dispatched to Afghanistan to bring back his head in a box. On December 13, 2001, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden discusses the attacks, but does not take responsibility. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt, even though the translation was not conducted by a third party and was instead provided by the Department of Defense. International establishments and many others question the legitimacy of the tape.
Ich habe die Übersetzung des Pentagons sorgfältig überprüft. Diese Übersetzung ist sehr problematisch. Sie ist an den wichtigsten Stellen, die die Täterschaft Bin Ladens beweisen sollten, nicht identisch mit dem arabischen Ton.
In a video aired on Al Jazeera 3 days before the 2004 presidential election, Bin Laden reportedly claims responsibility for 9/11 for the first time. Al Jazeera does not say how they received the tape. The final Bin Laden video was released in 2006. Does anyone else see a problem here? Osama bin Laden has never been captured or officially convicted for September 11, 2001. Although audio tapes attributed to him are occasionally released, as of this date, he is considered dead by most. As for the hijackers, the 19 hijackers were painted as radical Muslims, sneaking into the United States without any problem and raising zero suspicion as to what they were planning. First, they were not devout Muslims spending their last days preparing for paradise. In the months and weeks before the attacks, some of the hijackers are spotted several times at strip clubs and make several unexplained trips to Las Vegas. They drink heavily, receive lap dances, buy sex toys, and sleep with prostitutes, spending thousands of dollars within hours. The 9/11 Commission claims that the United States only knew of 3 hijackers prior to the attacks: Nawaf al-Hamzi, Salem al-Hamzi, and Khalid al-Midar. For starters,
Al-Kai Collins says he was paid $2,500 a month as an FBI informant in Phoenix. In a stunning disclosure to ABC News, he claims that 3 years before September 11th, he began providing the FBI with information about Hani Hanjour, a young Saudi who later helped fly hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the Pentagon.
They knew he lived in Phoenix. They knew his phone number. They knew his address. They knew what he drove. They knew everything there was to know about the guy.
The FBI emphatically denies that Collins provided any information about Hani Hanjour, but they do admit that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities of Phoenix because of his unusual background. Once in Phoenix in 1996, the FBI asked Collins to focus on a group of young Arab men, many of whom were taking flying lessons. Hani Hanjour was part of the group.
They drank alcohol. They messed around with girls and stuff like that. They all lived in an apartment together, Hani and the others.
Collins said he provided the FBI with basic facts, letting the FBI take it from there.
2 of the hijackers even lived with an FBI informant in San Diego and were visited by Hani Hanjour and Mohammed Atta. Finally, an intelligence unit by the name of Able Danger claimed to have identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other hijackers 2 years before 9/11. The Department of Defense and White House, of course, officially deny it. FBI Director Robert Mueller claimed that the hijackers gave no hint to those around them what they were about. However, this turns out to be far from the truth.
Shortly after Atta arrived in the country, he tried to get the U.S. government to essentially finance his plot, seeking a loan from the Department of Agriculture. Janelle Bryant is the USDA loan officer in Homestead, Florida, who Atta approached in May of 2000. Bryant says it was this television commercial about how to borrow money from the government that led Atta to the USDA office, seeking $650,000 for what he described as crop dusting.
He wanted to finance a twin-engine, 6-passenger aircraft and remove the seats. And he said he was an engineer, and he wanted to build a chemical tank that would fit inside the aircraft.
Bryant turned Atta down, but she spent more than an hour with him, talking, she says, of bin Laden, al-Qaeda, and targets. She says Atta became fixated with the aerial photo of Washington on her office wall.
He pulled out a wad of cash about that big around and started throwing money on my desk. He wanted that picture really bad. He asked about the Pentagon and the White House and pointed them out.
He asked about the Pentagon?
Yes, sir, he did. In fact, he picked out where the Pentagon was.
Bryan says Atta also asked her about security at the World Trade Center and what she knew of Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
Hijacker Hamza El-Ghamdi had a flight booked for later on the day of 9/11, and 2 after 9/11, one from LA to San Francisco, and 2 within Saudi Arabia. The complexities of the alleged hijackers are far and wide. We can only begin to scratch the surface here. They even managed to find hijacker Satam al-Suqami's passport, perfectly intact, on a sidewalk before the South Tower's collapse. Is it possible that the hijackers were merely patsies in a scheme much larger than themselves or Osama bin Laden?
Be careful where we stay on a loop, because these are being recorded and these tapes will be handed over. Everybody copy that? ICC copy.
I'm glad I'm not flying today. Don't worry, Jim. We'll carjack you on the way home.
Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would send fighter jets to intercept errant aircraft 67 times. Interceptions were routine and usually occur within 10 minutes of a sign of trouble, such as losing radio contact and transponder signal or flying off course. On September 11th, we are told that 4 commercial airliners were off course and out of communication, and not one of them could be intercepted.
Never did in anybody's thought process about how to protect America did we ever think that the evildoers would fly not 1, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets. Never.
Steve, I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One of the drills executed prior to September 11th was called Amalgam Virgo. It was conducted in the beginning of June 2001 and simulated a series of successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats like the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the capital. One part of the exercise involved a Haitian AIDS victim who makes a deal with the Colombian drug cartel to crash a private jet into Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in order to secure funding for AIDS patients. They even wrote up a suicide note for him. NORAD would deliver scripted messages from the FBI to controllers participating in the war games. And guess who was on the proposal's cover? Osama bin Laden. The second part of the exercise, which was planned before 9/11 but not executed until 2002, involved 2 Delta planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents hijacked the planes and diverted them to secure locations. The FBI claims it has no records regarding this exercise. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself. But before we cover those, on the morning of September 11th, President Bush was in Florida to promote an education policy. At approximately 8:30 a.m., he left his hotel and headed for Booker Elementary School in Sarasota. Before entering the building, he was aware a plane had struck one of the Twin Towers. In fact, Bush claimed more than once that he saw the first strike live on television. This is impossible, unless President Bush saw something the public has not. Video of the first strike was not broadcast until later that evening. Minutes after Flight 175 strikes the South Tower, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans into President Bush's ear, whispering and walking away. And President Bush continues to listen to My Pet Goat. Despite the fact that both Twin Towers had been hit and another plane was in the air and suspected to be hijacked, he remained at the school for a half hour, addressing the nation at 9:30 a.m. How could the Secret Service allow this? President Bush's itinerary had been public knowledge since September 7th. The only way Booker Elementary could not be considered a target was if the Secret Service knew for a fact that it wasn't. With that being said, September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. It did so by placing inputs onto the screens of military controllers at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome, New York, known as NEADS. As the attacks unfolded, controllers at NEADS thought that what they were watching was all part of an exercise.
Would drink, visit strip clubs, and solicit prostitutes.
By all accounts, Atta and his cousin kept to themselves, except for last Thursday, at this bar in Hollywood, Florida. It's believed both men came in, drank heavily, and then refused to pay the bill.
And the guy got very, very offended, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I can pay my bill. I'm an airline pilot." And I was like, okay.
Mahed Maked is spotted several times at a porn shop. Hamza Al-Ghamdi ordered a porno in his hotel on September 10th. The mayor of Paterson, New Jersey, states that they are spotted more at go-go clubs than at mosques. Regardless of their actions, some of the hijackers' presence was known as early as 2000.
What did we know? When did we know it? That's what some congressmen are asking now, and asking quite loudly. Did we know the year before 9/11 that one of the hijackers was a terrorist threat?
Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer has gone public with his charge that Able Danger, a military intelligence project he worked with in 2000, identified Mohammed Atta, even pulled up his picture along with 3 other 9/11 hijackers as possible al-Qaeda members.
We found the identities of 4 of the 9/11 hijackers prior to 9/11.
But he says beginning in September 2000, 3 meetings he set up with the FBI were each canceled by military lawyers. Schaefer also says he remembers telling then 9/11 Commission staff at a meeting in Afghanistan about Atta and what the intelligence unit found back in 2000. And he was surprised that it did not show up in the Commission's report.
I'm told confidently by the person who did move the material over that the 9/11 Commission received 2 briefcase-size containers of documents. I can tell you for a fact that would not be 1/20th of the information that Able Danger consisted of during the time we spent.
A 9/11 Commission spokesman said nothing they got from the Pentagon in early 2004 backed up Schaefer's claim, quote, "None of the documents turned over to the Commission mentioned Mohammed Atta or any of the other future hijackers."
Where is it? Where's the beef? Where's the substance? Where is this mysterious chart that purportedly says that Atta was connected in some real way to these other hijackers? We'd love to see it.
The company responsible for the chart, Orion Scientific Systems, would claim that only 2 charts were produced and that Atta was not present on either one.
Throw them all out, John. These are all the charts. Spread them out. These are all Orion-produced charts. These charts were all done by the data mining efforts. So the Orion Corporation lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee staff. All data mining efforts, and yet the company said to the Senate Judiciary staff, "We don't have any of those charts. They're not ours." Well, here they are, and their logos are on each one of them. Well, Mr. Chairman, at least 2 of the 5 people that were going to appear today were threatened with removal of their security clearances if they continue to talk about this. This is going back.
Are you at liberty to identify who those 2 are?
I will to you. I'd rather do it privately since the Defense Department has chosen not to allow anyone to testify, but I will provide that information to the committee.
For the life of me, I don't understand why, as I understand it, I stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand the witnesses we assumed we were going to get to hear from the Defense Department have been pulled. They may be or may not be in the room, but have been instructed that they cannot testify. I think that's a big mistake.
This is actually a chart of Al-Qaeda and the various cells around the world. Much of this data, most of it was obtained prior to 9/11 by the work of Able Danger. As you see, there is an actual photograph of Muhammad Atta.
What does that depict generally?
It depicts the organizational and activity associations of Al-Qaeda operatives that were involved in 9/11 and related events.
And at the time, if the Commission had looked into this in early 2004, the charts that had Muhammad Atta on it still existed. There was a chart in Mr. Smith's office. There was the chart that still should have been in the Defense Intelligence Agency because it wasn't destroyed within Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer's files until the spring of 2004. The same with the chart that Mr. Smith had.
Our support to Able Danger became severely restricted and ultimately shut down due to intelligence oversight concerns. I was supported vigorously by both the LEWA and the INSCOM chain of commands, and we actively worked to overcome this shutdown for the next several months. In the midst of this shutdown, I, along with one of my analysts, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Terry Stevens, were forced to destroy all data, charts, and other analytical products that we had not already passed on to SOCOM related to Able Danger.
Another former DOD official will testify today that he was ordered to destroy up to 2.5 terabytes of data. Now, I don't know what a terabyte of data is, so we contacted the Library of Congress. It's equal to 1/4 of all the entire written collection that the Library of Congress maintains.
Are you in a position to evaluate the credibility of Captain Philpott, Colonel Schaefer, Mr. Westphal, Ms. Preissler, Mr. J.D. Smith as to their credibility when they say they saw Muhammad Atta on a chart?
Yes, sir. I believe them implicitly.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was the first member of Able Danger to go public, has now been told in writing by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he can't speak to members of Congress or their staff without prior approval. And now a security clearance, which allowed him to deal with classified information, has been pulled. The congressman says Schaefer has been gagged, punished for speaking up.
The official response to Able Danger began in September 2005 with a letter from 9/11 Commissioner Slade Gordon to Senator Arlen Specter. Gordon concludes by saying that since Condoleezza Rice, President Bush, and the White House denied that Able Danger identified the 9/11 hijackers, it never happened. A 6-month investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded in December 2006 that Able Danger did not identify Muhammad Atta or any other 9/11 hijacker. Can we be certain that the hijackers were radical Muslims on a suicide mission? Or is there a possibility that they were trained, funded, and protected in our own country? Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would scramble fighter jets to intercept errant aircraft 67 times. Interceptions are routine and usually occur within 10 minutes of a sign of trouble, such as permanently losing radio contact and transponder signal or flying off course. On the morning of September 11th, according to official accounts, 4 commercial airliners would be off course and out of communication, and not one of them would be intercepted.
How is it that on 4 separate occasions on one day that $1 trillion military and intelligence infrastructure could fail?
I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets, but according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are big questions about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One drill, called Amalgam Virgo, was conducted on June 1st and 2nd, 2001, and simulated successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats, including an airborne hijacking. One plan would simulate the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the Capitol. The second part of the exercise, which was planned but not executed before 9/11, involved 2 planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents would hijack the planes and divert them to secure locations. And on its cover, Osama bin Laden. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
The answer to the question is no, did not impair our response. In fact, General Eberhart, who was then the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, as he testified in front of the 9/11 Commission, I believe he told them that it enhanced our ability to respond. There were 2 CPXs. There was 1 Department of Justice exercise that didn't have anything to do with the other 3, and there was an actual operation ongoing because there was some Russian bomber activity up near Alaska.
So, did the war games ultimately help or hinder our response? September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. Vigilant Guardian is a branch of Global Guardian, a mass Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. Originally scheduled to take place in late October, Global Guardian was moved to September. The exercise is reportedly canceled after the second Twin Tower is hit. 3 E-4B Doomsday planes remain airborne.
2 government sources familiar with the incident tell CNN it was a military aircraft, but say the details are classified. This comparison of the CNN video and an official Air Force photo suggests the mystery plane is among the military's most sensitive aircraft, an Air Force E-4B. The E-4B is a state-of-the-art flying command post, built and equipped for one reason: to keep the government running no matter what, even in the event of a nuclear war. Ask the Pentagon, and it insists this is not a military aircraft, and there is no mention of it in the official report of the 9/11 Commission. The Pentagon, the Secret Service, and the FAA all say they, at least for public consumption, have no explanation of the giant plane over the president's house, just as the smoke began to rise across the river at the Pentagon.
Barksdale Air Force Base also participated in Global Guardian. Instead of returning directly to Washington, D.C., President Bush would fly to both Barksdale and Offutt Air Force Base before returning to the White House. Another drill, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets to Canada and Alaska to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs on a training mission. Northern Vigilance also placed inputs onto military radar screens. Also referred to as phantoms, inputs are simulated errant aircraft which appear real to those participating in the exercise.
We fought many phantoms that day.
3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located 15 miles from the Pentagon, are flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina. Fort Belvoir, an Army base 10 miles south of the Pentagon, intended to test security in case of a terrorist attack. Employees in the Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7 continue preparations for Tripod, a biological attack drill scheduled for September 12th. Finally, the National Reconnaissance Office in Virginia begins a drill at 8:45, conducted by a team from the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their building. Also, a number of war games were being conducted that have yet to be fully disclosed.
Ask about the war games that were planned for 9/11.
Commissioner Gorelick.
Could you please be quiet? We have only a few minutes with General Myers. I'd like to ask a question. General Myers, I'm sorry.
I would ask, please, people in the audience to be quiet if you want to stay here.
So, sir, statement. This commission has not answered my questions. I'm walking out. It's a farce. I will. Thank you.
So let me get this straight. On the morning of 9/11, the United States is running drills in which hijacked aircraft go in and out of radar. Fighter jets are flown out of the United States, and planes are crashed into buildings. What a coincidence.
And in terms of what motivated me to bring all the aircraft down, as you see one thing happen, that's an accident. When you see two of the same thing occur, it's a pattern. But when you see three of the same thing occur, it's a program. And so at that point, I decided to bring all the aircraft down.
And so, at 9:45, all airborne planes were forced to land. This order applied to all civilian aircraft. Certain military planes were allowed to remain airborne. By 12:16 that afternoon, the FAA managed to ground over 4,000 planes without incident.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
I'm going to be showing you evidence of why the Pentagon was hit. I'm going to be showing you why Flight 97 was hit, and why Flight 97 was taken down, and why the Pentagon was hit. I'm going to be showing you evidence why the Pentagon hit was maybe staged. But about Flight 93, it's possible that it landed. I want to let you know there's possible evidence that Flight 93 landed, by the way, just to let you know. But in terms of the Pentagon, I'm going to show you evidence why the Pentagon was hit by a missile, and why it was partially staged. Because I don't know why the Pentagon was hit. Actually, no, I don't know what happened at the Pentagon, but I think they wanted to get rid of stuff at that specific location in the Pentagon. In the Pentagon, they specifically want to get rid of military papers for the war, by the way, so they had to purposely shot that area in the Pentagon. There's interesting evidence why it was a missile, and why a missile hit the Pentagon, or a drone plane, or whatever, because I believe some kind of drone plane hit the Pentagon. Of some kind. I think it was partially staged. And I'm going to be showing you evidence of why it was partially staged. Evidence was planted. That's the thing. Evidence was planted. And I'm going to be showing you a lot of evidence of why evidence was planted there. So, to make it look like we were under attack. And also, besides, there's Israel involvement. And Israel involvement in Saudi Arabia. And why Saudi Arabia was also involved. Now, Saudi Arabia, I think, played a role in 9/11, but I think they played a major factor. They had key players connect with the hijackers. I mean, they were players in 9/11. I'll just leave it as that. I think Saudi Arabia did play a big participant role in 9/11. I'll leave it as that. But in terms of Israel is the major factor of 9/11. You have to remember, Israel is a major player in 9/11. They're intimately involved. I'm going to be showing you of the Mossad agency, and of the Dancing Israels.
Now, there were 5 Israeli Mossad agents who said they were there to document the event. This event is called the Dancing Israels, by the way, and they were cheering the buildings falling down, and these Israel Mossad agents were cheering on. They were celebrating that the buildings fell. And by the way, and I quote, they said they were there to document the event. I'll show you evidence of that and what happened there. Benjamin Netanyahu is a key player. Benjamin Netanyahu had a lot to gain in this event because they wanted to frame the Arabs and Palestinians. That's why. To make it look like it's an Arab-Muslim, to make it look like it's a Muslim terror attack, an Arab terror attack, Islamic whatever, Palestinian, Islamic whatever, you know? And it's crazy. And that's kind of basically what happened. And I'm going to be showing you evidence of that, why Israel did that. Well, the Mossad, because the Mossad is basically the mastermind of 9/11. Mossad is basically mostly involved in 9/11. Israel is involved in 9/11. And, same thing, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's one of the masterminds of 9/11. Let's be clear about that. I want to let you guys know that. So I'm going to be showing that evidence right now. So I'm going to be showing you that evidence right now.
10:06 a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Flight 93 was en route from New Jersey to California with 45 passengers when it went off course at 8:56 over Cleveland, Ohio. According to the official story, Flight 93 was headed for the White House when it was overpowered by a group of passengers and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Out of all of the events of 9/11, the one that has caused the most confusion is Flight 93. It was shot down, it wasn't shot down. However, evidence suggests that perhaps Flight 93 was nowhere near Shanksville.
I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate of Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire, just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
Wally Miller, a Somerset County coroner, told the Houston Chronicle, "It looked like somebody just dropped a bunch of metal out of the sky." In the Washington Post, "It looked like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it." And as for the passengers, I stopped being coroner after about 20 minutes because there were no bodies there. In the Pittsburgh Review, I have not, to this day, seen a single drop of blood. Not a drop. It would seem that, on one day, for the second time in history, an entire plane, along with its passengers, disappeared upon impact.
There are no signs of any survivors at the site of a Nigerian plane crash. That is the word from the Red Cross, which has a representative on site. The first pictures of the crash scene show a large crater with the Boeing 737 broken into small pieces. The plane crashed shortly after taking off from Lagos in a heavy storm. The flight was going to the Nigerian capital of Abuja and was believed to be carrying some senior Nigerian officials.
So if Flight 93 didn't go down in Shanksville, then where? You ready for this? Cleveland. At 11:43 on September 11th, WCPO, a local TV station in Cincinnati, Ohio, reported that 2 planes landed at Cleveland Hopkins Airport due to a bomb threat. United Airlines identified one of the planes as Flight 93. Are you confused? Well, it gets better. Check it out. At approximately 10 a.m., Cleveland Hopkins Airport was evacuated amidst rumors that a hijacked plane was going to land. Passengers had to leave, but couldn't drive. They had to walk or hitchhike. Buses weren't allowed to leave. People were sent home. According to Associated Press and local Ohio papers, one plane landed at approximately 10:45. But Delta Airlines confirmed that their plane, Delta 1989, landed in Cleveland at 10:10. Therefore, Flight 93 landed at Cleveland at approximately 10:45. Authorities searched Delta 1989 for over 2 hours, and passengers were questioned individually. The plane dealer reported that the plane was evacuated at 12:30, but the Akron Beacon reports that a plane was evacuated at 11:15, which would make that Flight 93. Mayor White reported that the plane had 200 passengers, but a passenger from Delta 1989 describes 60 or so passengers. So at 11:15, 200 or so passengers were released from Flight 93. The passenger from Delta 1989 states that she was taken into FAA headquarters, but other reports say that passengers were brought into the NASA Glenn Research Center, located near the west end of the airport, which had already been evacuated. So, to sum up, Delta 1989 landed at 10:10, was evacuated at 12:30, almost 2.5 hours later, and 69 passengers were taken to FAA headquarters. Flight 93 landed at 10:45 and evacuated within a half hour. 200 or so passengers quickly taken to an empty NASA research center. Why did it take 140 minutes to evacuate 69 passengers when 200 were evacuated in a half hour? We can assume that the passengers from Delta 1989 are safe somewhere. The question remains, what happened to the 200 or so passengers from Flight 93? It's interesting to note that the combined total of all the passengers from all 4 flights is 198, or 243, depending on who you ask. We may never know what really happened to Flight 93, but we do know what didn't happen. Whenever this evidence is presented to people, you'll usually get one of many different questions. 10:03 a.m. Shanksville, Pennsylvania. United Airlines Flight 93 allegedly plows into an abandoned strip mine at 580 miles per hour. 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Originally, the official story is that passengers on board the plane overthrew the hijackers and sacrificed themselves to prevent further casualties. The 9/11 Commission will later conclude that hijacker Ziad Jarrah, anticipating a cockpit overthrow, crashes the plane into the ground. Debris from Flight 93 was found considerable distances from the crash site.
The debris here is spread over a 3 to 4 mile radius, which has now been completely sealed off and is being treated, according to the FBI, as a crime scene. This is one of those cases where the pictures really do tell the story, that sort of the most horrifying aspect of this particular crash scene is how little debris is visible. That's really all you see is a large crater in the ground and just tiny, tiny bits of debris. There has been at least one report that the investigators out there, and there are hundreds of them, as I said tonight, have found nothing larger than a phone book.
Well, Darren, in the last hour or so, the FBI and the state police here have confirmed that they have cordoned off a second area about 6 to 8 miles away from the crater here where this plane went down. This is apparently another debris site, which raises a number of questions. Why would debris from the plane, and they identified it specifically as being from this plane, why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely. Almost all the debris found at this site is within 100 yards, 200 yards away. So it raises some questions. We don't want to over-speculate, of course.
It seems to me, from covering a number of plane crashes on the scene, that if nothing else, you can say this is not typical for a plane crash to be spread across an area this large.
It certainly doesn't make sense, because most of the debris has been found in a very compact area, within 100 yards, 200 yards, maybe a little beyond that. And then all of a sudden they're telling us 6 miles away they have another concentration of debris. They say it's very small pieces. Most of these are very small pieces. Most of the pieces here are no bigger than the size of a briefcase, they say, and the pieces 6 miles away, maybe even smaller than that.
Did they find a plane in Shanksville?
Within the last hour. I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. From where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire. Just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
From the Somerset County coroner to the mayor of Shanksville, almost every eyewitness would remark how little of the plane and its passengers remained.
But when I got there, I wondered to myself, where is it? The plane was just totally disintegrated. The only thing we didn't see were people.
Nothing to indicate that there was even anybody on the plane.
I remember asking a state trooper that was there to be sure, is that where the plane went down? It was so hard to tell because there was nothing around.
The Pennsylvania state website puts it best. It is difficult to believe that a 757 plunged into the ground with such force that the plane literally disintegrated and created a still, smoldering crater. Is there any historical precedent for a commercial airliner disintegrating upon impact?
The emergency services realize their task is hopeless. John Heavey and his team confront the horror of the scene. The twisted wreckage of 191 lies scattered for hundreds of meters. Debris has smashed into the trailer park, destroying 5 homes.
In 1988, Pan Am 103 exploded in mid-air over the town of Lockerbie in Scotland, killing 270 people. Terrorists checked a bag containing a bomb into the hold, but didn't board the plane. The sea below them is on fire.
Saying that the pilot was able to dump fuel over Jamaica Bay.
It immediately veered over to the right and it came nose down only a block away from where I was working.
And the room just exploded. My daughter got blown through the patio doors. My wife got blown into the living room and I got blown out the patio doors behind my daughter.
Several blocks away from the primary crash scene, the aircraft may have been rocked by vibrations severe enough to knock the engines off the wings.
Jim, let me just tell our audience what you're looking at. These are from Jamaica Bay. This is clearly a part of the plane.
Yes, that would be the horizontal stabilizer, the vertical tail fin on the back of the airplane.
In 2006, during the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, the FBI managed to provide a multitude of evidence that appears to have survived a catastrophic crash in near pristine condition. Among the exhibits were a red bandana, a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia driver's license, John Talignani's driver's license, and flight attendant Cece Lyle's personal effects, including her driver's license and Marriott hotel card. Although a 757 managed to obliterate itself upon impact, paper and fabric managed to survive without a scratch. They also released pictures of an engine and 2 pieces of fuselage. It is not specified where those were found. Once again, the FBI stepped in to supervise every aspect of the investigation. They repeatedly denied family members' requests to listen to the cockpit voice recorder. The FBI gave in on April 18, 2002, as long as the victims' relatives didn't talk about it. And for some reason, the last 3 minutes were unaccounted for. No explanation has been given. Even after Zacarias Moussaouy's sentencing, the actual cockpit voice recorder has yet to be released. The 9/11 Commission concludes that the military was not informed of Flight 93 until 10:07, minutes after it had crashed.
We heard the explosion. Actually, our power had gone off, and then we felt a tremor. We had just gotten up, and the next thing I know, it sounded like a missile came across our house. I mean, they were going that fast. It was flying. It was coming from that direction. I have no idea what it was. Oh no, it wasn't the aircraft that crashed. No, it's hard for me to believe that they did not know about that aircraft until 10:07. That's difficult for me to believe.
Despite the discussions about military assistance, no one from FAA headquarters requested military assistance regarding United 93, nor did any manager at FAA headquarters pass any of the information it had about United 93 to the military.
A year after 9/11, military officials were telling an entirely different story, that Flight 93 was being tracked.
In the Pentagon Command Center, there's a report of another hijacked plane, United Airlines Flight 93.
We received a report from the FAA that Flight 93 had turned off its transponder, had turned, and was now heading towards Washington, D.C. The decision was made to try to go intercept Flight 93.
The rules have changed. We could do something about it now.
Colonel Bob Marr is in command at the Northeast Air Defense Sector base in Rome, New York.
The words that I remember as clear as day was, "We will take lives in the air to preserve lives on the ground."
Marr orders his air controllers tell the pilots to intercept Flight 93.
United Airlines Flight 93 will not be allowed to reach Washington, D.C.
The closure time came and went, and nothing had happened. So you can imagine everything was very tense.
Flight 93 is about 175 miles north and west of Washington, flying over Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Up above, a fighter jet streaks by.
It was about 10:03 that the fighters reported that Flight 93 had crashed.
Eventually, of course, we never fired on any aircraft.
When you heard the plane was down without a shot being fired at it, do you remember what you said?
We just witnessed an act of heroism.
Was Flight 93 downed by hijackers in an open field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Or is the truth being withheld from the public? .38, Arlington, Virginia. Hani Hanyour allegedly executes a 330-degree turn at 530 miles per hour, descending 7,000 feet in 2.5 minutes to crash American Airlines Flight 77 into the ground floor of the Pentagon. Its final approach took it directly across Interstate 395. Knocking light poles out of the ground and bouncing off of the lawn before impact. First, let's meet Hani Hanyour. Hanyour had come to Freeway Airport in Bowie, Maryland 1 month earlier seeking to rent a small plane. However, when Hanyour went on 3 test runs in the second week of August, he had trouble controlling and landing a single-engine Cessna 172.
Well, my name is Marcel Bernard, and I'm the chief flight instructor here at Freeway.
Hani Hanjour. Well, basically what happened with him is he showed up at the airport and wanted to get checked out in the aircraft. See, he was already certified. He didn't come to us for flight training.
Yeah, he already had a pilot's license,
He had already earned his private instrument commercial at a school in Arizona, and I don't remember the name of the school, but already had certificates in hand. And we sometimes occasionally have pilots that come to us that don't want flight training but just want to rent our aircraft.
Which is the case of Hani Hanjour.
This was the case for Hani. He wanted to get checked out, as we call it, to rent our aircraft. And our insurance requires that he flies with one of our instructors to be found competent to rent.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the process that he was going through. So, the consensus was that he was very quiet, average or below average piloting skills.
Mm-hmm.
English was very poor. So I don't know where to. That's about the best description I can give you for his demeanor at times. Very, uneventful from our perspective.
Regardless, air traffic controllers at Dulles International Airport that were tracking Flight 77 all thought that it was a military plane. Second, the light poles. On November 22, 2004, a private jet en route to Houston to pick up George Bush Sr. clipped a single light pole and crashed a minute away from landing at Houston's Hobby Airport. The wing ripped off upon impact, scattering debris over 100 yards. And yet, Flight 77 managed to tear 5 light poles completely out of the ground without damaging either the wings or the light poles themselves. Instead, they seem to have just popped out of the ground. Third, you only have to look at the photos from that day to realize that whatever hit the Pentagon did not bounce off the lawn. If Flight 77 had crash landed and skidded into the Pentagon, it would have looked like this. Instead, it looked like this, without a single scratch on the lawn. Fourth, why is there absolutely no trace of Flight 77?
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
The official explanation is that the intense heat from the jet fuel vaporized the entire plane. Indeed, from these pictures, it seems that there is absolutely no trace of a Boeing 757. But if the fire was hot enough to incinerate a jumbo jet, then how can investigators identify 184 out of 189 people found at the Pentagon? The Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, which was responsible for the task, was also responsible for identifying the dead in Shanksville. Keep that in mind for later. So what is a Boeing 757 made of? I called Boeing to ask, but the operator informed me that Boeing refuses to give out any information regarding the construction of their aircraft due to the attacks of September 11th. But what we do know is that a 757 has 2 Pratt & Whitney engines made of steel and titanium alloy, which are 9 feet in diameter, 12 feet long, and weigh 6 tons each. Titanium has a melting point of 1,688 degrees Celsius. Jet fuel, also known as kerosene, is a hydrocarbon, which can retain a constant temperature of 1,120 degrees Celsius after 40 minutes, but only if the fuel is maintained. The fuel would have burned off immediately upon impact. Therefore, it is scientifically impossible that 12 tons of steel and titanium was vaporized by kerosene. Likewise, the 2 engines should have been found relatively intact at the Pentagon. Instead, there was a single turbojet engine approximately 3 feet in diameter found inside the building. After this photo was published by American Free Press, readers wrote in to suggest that the turbine was a piece from the Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, mounted in the tail section of a 757. Chris Bolin contacted Honeywell in Phoenix, Arizona, the manufacturer of a 757's APU. An expert, speaking on the condition of anonymity, told him that there's no way that that's an APU wheel. Bolin then contacted Pratt & Whitney and Rolls-Royce, the two companies that manufacture 757 engines. Pratt & Whitney pointed Bolin towards Rolls-Royce, and John W. Brown, a spokesman for Rolls-Royce, told Bolin that it is not a part from any Rolls-Royce engine that I'm familiar with. In an article written by Carl Schwartz, President and Chief Executive Officer of Patmos Nanotechnologies, LLC, and INET Security Systems, he believes that the piece is a JT-8D turbojet engine from a U.S. Air Force A-3 Skywarrior. The piece in the FEMA photo is the front shaft bearing housing. Jet engines have a center shaft, which must be balanced, as well as bear seals on the front and back. The photo shows the front seal and a rotor hub missing its fan blades. These blades are easily removed in a collision such as the one found at the Pentagon. The United States Air Force has only a few A-3s left in operation, and they are stored in Van Nuys, California, at Hughes Aircraft, which is now better known as Raytheon. So if this piece didn't come from a 757, then where? And where are the engines from Flight 77? The second identifiable piece of debris was allegedly a piece of the fuselage. Skeptics have claimed that this is proof that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, but this piece could have come from any American Airlines plane. And why is it not singed or scratched after a 530-mile-per-hour impact and the subsequent fireball? The third piece of debris was a diffuser case. Let's look a little closer at the diffuser case of a 757. Do you see the triangular bezels around the openings? Those are nowhere to be found on the case found at the Pentagon. The remainder of the debris was light enough to have been carried by hand, and employees at the Pentagon were seen carrying away a large box shrouded in a blue tarp. Why the mystery? If Flight 77 was vaporized on impact, it would be the first time in aviation history. For example, August 15, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522, a Boeing 737 en route to Athens, Greece, crashed into a hillside at full speed. 121 passengers, all dead. Fire. Tail sections. Wing sections. Engines. Cockpit. Bodies. Catch my drift? Fifth, why is the damage to the Pentagon completely inconsistent with a Boeing 757? These photos were taken before the roof of the outer ring had collapsed. The only damage to the outer wall is a single hole, no more than 16 feet in diameter. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan, and weighs almost 100 tons. Are we supposed to believe that it disappeared into this hole without leaving any wreckage on the outside? Why is there no damage from where the wings, or the vertical stabilizer, or the engines would have slammed into the building? Remember how big the engines were? If 6 tons of steel and titanium slammed into the Pentagon at 530 miles per hour, they would bury themselves inside the building, leaving 2 very distinct imprints. And yet, the only damage on the outside of the Pentagon is this single hole, with no damage from where the engines would have hit. Why are the windows next to the hole completely intact? Why are the cable spools directly in front of the hole completely untouched? And as for the inside of the Pentagon, there's another hole, approximately 16 feet in diameter, found on the other side of the C-ring, 3 rings from the impact. For that hole to have been caused by Flight 77, the Boeing would have had to smash through 9 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. The nose of a commercial airliner is composed of lightweight carbon. This is what usually happens to the nose of a commercial airliner in a plane crash. If the nose caused this hole, where's the rest of the debris from the plane? So what could blow a 16-foot hole in the outer ring of the Pentagon, smash through 9 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, and leave another 16-foot hole? A cruise missile. This is what Slobodan Milosevic's residence in Belgrade looked like after a Tomahawk cruise missile had hit it. See any similarities?
Sixth, the eyewitnesses. Some saw a huge 100-ton commercial airliner.
Standstill, and I looked off. I was, looked out my window. I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet, coming.
Some saw a small 8 to 20 passenger commuter plane.
I saw what looked to be maybe a 20-passenger corporate jet, no markings on the side, coming in at a shallow.
And some saw a United States military helicopter.
When it occurred, he said that he saw a helicopter circle the building. He said that it appeared to be a U.S. military helicopter and that it disappeared behind the building where the helicopter landing zone is, and that he then saw a fireball go into the sky.
So who's telling the truth? Take this into consideration. April Gallup was working in the Pentagon's west side when it was hit. In Jim Mars's book, Inside Job, April claims, while in the hospital, men in suits visited her more than once. They never identified themselves or what agency they worked for. They didn't tell her what to say, just made suggestions. For example, to take the compensation money and shut up. They also kept insisting that a plane hit the building. They repeated this over and over. But I was there, and I never saw a plane, or even debris from a plane. I figured this story is to brainwash people. So if a Boeing 757 didn't hit the Pentagon, then what did? Eyewitnesses inside and outside the building were thrown to the ground by what they described as a shockwave. Even the Sheraton Hotel, 1.6 miles away, was rocked by the blast. A number of military personnel at the Pentagon specifically mentioned smelling cordite. Cordite and jet fuel have two very distinct smells. Cordite is a compound used in ammunition which is comprised of nitroguanidine, nitrocellulose, and nitroglycerin. It is cool burning, produces little smoke and no flash, but produces a strong detonation wave. And eyewitnesses described a bright, silvery flash. Jet fuel combustion, i.e., the planes that struck the Twin Towers, is bright yellow at best. Watch this. A massive smoldering fireball. No silvery flash, no shockwave. And at the Pentagon, a tiny, bright, silvery flash, which shakes nearby buildings. Whatever it was, it might have been related to the two planes that were in the air after the crash. The first one was uniformly identified as a C-130. The second plane was an unmarked white plane flying over Washington, D.C.
Aaron, I'm standing in Lafayette Park directly across from the White House, perhaps about 200 yards from the White House residence itself. About 10 minutes ago, there was a white jet circling overhead. Now, you generally don't see planes in the area over the White House. That is restricted airspace. No reason to believe that this jet was there for any nefarious purposes, but the Secret Service was very concerned, pointing up at the jet in the sky. It is out of sight now, best we can tell.
At 9:25, Jane Garvey, the head of the FAA, initiated a national ground stop, which prevents further takeoffs and requires all planes in the air to land. The order, which hasn't been implemented since 1903, applied to almost every single kind of plane, civilian, military, or law enforcement. Certain military flights were allowed to fly during this time, but the FAA isn't talking. Why were these two planes allowed in the air when everyone else had to land? And finally, why did people keep reporting a second explosion at the Pentagon?
Well, I can't tell you about that, but I was just here in front of the Capitol, which, by the way, has been evacuated, and back toward the Supreme Court area, we just heard a low, muffled thud. It sounded like a small explosion.
There have been unconfirmed reports of second explosions here at the Pentagon. We have not confirmed that, but again, the counterintelligence sources...
Where did this fireball come from? Seventh, surveillance cameras from a gas station, Sheraton Hotel, and the Virginia Department of Transportation captured the entire thing. However, the FBI was there within minutes to confiscate the tapes, including a warning for the employees not to discuss what they had seen. If the government wishes to prove once and for all that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, all they would have to do is release one of those tapes. Instead, they released 5 frames from a camera across the heliport, even though none of them show a 757. And finally, why do satellite photos taken 4 days before 9/11 show a white marking on the front lawn, marking almost the exact trajectory of whatever hit the Pentagon 4 days later? And is it merely a coincidence that the Pentagon was hit in the only section that was renovated to withstand that very same kind of attack? And that Donald Rumsfeld was safe in his office on the opposite end of the building? If the government has nothing to hide, why are they so afraid to answer a few questions or release a few videos? 9:37, Arlington, Virginia. American Airlines Flight 77 allegedly crashes into the ground floor of the Pentagon. Pentagon authorities will deny that the building had anti-aircraft defense. The FBI arrives within minutes, and the site is declared a federal crime scene, becoming their exclusive responsibility. With the help of civilians, they comb the Pentagon lawn for debris, and within 24 hours, they had confiscated every known video of the attack. Pentagon officials initially denied that any of their cameras captured the event. However, on March 7, 2002, 5 images taken by a security camera from across the heliport are released. For years, these 5 frames were the only public footage of the Pentagon attack. This would change on October 14, 2004, when Scott Bingham would file a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit requesting videotapes that captured the impact of Flight 77. Special Agent Jacqueline McGuire of the FBI located a CD-ROM that contains copies of 2 time-lapse recordings made by security cameras, released on March 16, 2006. A video taken from a Citgo gas station, which is open only to Pentagon employees, released on September 15, 2006. And the Doubletree Hotel in Arlington, Virginia, released on December 7, 2006. Agent McGuire concluded that the FBI possessed 85 videotapes that might be potentially responsive. As of this date, we have no clear images of what happened at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. The official story goes as such. American Airlines Flight 77 was taken over by 5 hijackers, led by Hani Hanjour. Hanjour entered the United States in 1996 to become a professional airline pilot. He would not complete a single course.
It's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Average or below average piloting skills. English was very poor, uneventful from our perspective.
The 9/11 Commission concludes that Hanjour was perhaps the most experienced and highly trained pilot.
Flight 93's hijacker, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, was a former Saudi fighter pilot. How could Hanjour be more experienced than him? On the morning of 9/11, Hani Hanjour and his 4 accomplices traveled to Dulles International Airport outside of Washington, D.C. They had spent the weeks beforehand at the Valencia Motel in Laurel, Maryland, 6 miles from the National Security Agency. All 5 will set off metal detectors and be subjected to additional screening, yet all of them proceed to board American Airlines Flight 77, which is described by the Washington Post as unusually light on passengers. Out of 188 seats, 64 would be filled. In fact, all 4 planes involved in 9/11 would be at approximately 30% capacity. The hijackers will board alongside Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, and a number of employees from Boeing, Raytheon, the Department of Defense, Lockheed Martin, American Airlines, the Navy, Army, and other government agencies. The pilots were Officer David Charlebois and Captain Charles Burlingame. Charles Frank Burlingame III, an aeronautical engineer and a graduate of both the Naval Academy and Top Gun Fighter Pilot School, flew F-4 fighter jets and developed anti-terrorism strategies at the Pentagon before retiring in 1989 to take a job at American Airlines. He would remain active in the reserves and anti-terrorism exercises until 1996. His Boeing 757 would be crashed into the very section of the Pentagon he used to work in. The hijackers would have only moments to subdue both Charlebois and Burlingame, remove them from the cockpit, and retain control of the airplane. Yet, the plane is hijacked without incident at 8:51 and makes an unauthorized turn to the south 3 minutes later. No mayday, no hijack code, no sign of struggle. Flight 77 will fly all the way back from the Kentucky-Ohio border, coasting for another 43 minutes against its flight path before crashing into the Pentagon without any military interception. Had Hani Hanjour wanted to inflict maximum damage, all he had to do was continue his trajectory and nose down into the roof of the Pentagon. Instead, he begins a complicated 330-degree turn, dropping 7,000 feet and exposing himself for an additional 3 minutes while executing a maneuver described by experienced pilots as nearly impossible, requiring professional expertise. In essence, an amateur pilot considered a waste of resources by instructors, who was unable to control a small Cessna in August 2001, executed this nearly impossible maneuver in a 757 with skilled precision a month later.
Todd Lewis is working radar at Dulles Airport.
One of my colleagues saw a target moving from the northwest to the southeast.
And it was just a countdown, 10 miles west.
And she notified the supervisor.
9 miles west.
But nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight. I thought that Langley had scrambled some fighters and...
It was almost a sense of relief. This must be a fighter.
Maybe one of them got up there.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast, like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
This must be one of our guys, sent in, scrambled to patrol our capital.
The 757 will descend over Columbia Pike, flying adjacent to the Sheraton Hotel, Virginia Department of Transportation, Navy Annex, and fly past the Citgo gas station before crossing Washington Boulevard. 5 light poles are knocked out of the ground. One reportedly strikes the Washington, D.C. taxi, driven by Lloyd England. Flight 77 manages to hit the only section that was reinforced to withstand a terrorist attack, including reinforced steel and blast-resistant Kevlar windows an 1.5 inches thick. The renovation, planning for which had begun in 1991, was only days away from completion. Had the plane struck anywhere else, the casualties and damage would have been far greater. An area that normally would have housed up to 5,000 occupants yielded 125 casualties. The Pentagon's outer wall had a hole approximately 20 feet in diameter on the first and second floor, and visible damage 90 feet across the first floor.
I would say if it was 16 feet diameter, 20 feet tops,
that's what was starting me so curious. As I was trying to find something, there was no marks on the grass. Something never hit the ground. It didn't hit the heliport. I mean, it was a precision or awfully lucky hit. I mean, I don't know how it didn't bounce. I don't know how it hit directly in the side of the building without touching the ground, going as fast as it obviously was going. But I can't believe the thing is more than a garage door. And again, the classic airplane crash has wreckage. I mean, they found the axles from the Ryder truck in Oklahoma City. I can't believe they can't find an engine.
Opinions differ at this point. People that believe a 757 hit the Pentagon, and people that don't. Those that believe a 757 did hit are fueled by the damage path, wreckage outside the building, and eyewitness testimony.
While we were sitting in the office, and all of a sudden we heard some rumbling, something is kind of hitting us. Very imminent things could happen. So we look at each other, and it really, the noise is unbearable. And at the last moment, my brother jumped out the office.
I heard about the very big jet sound. Looks like just up to here. I just look at the outside, big black wings coming that way. And then I just running out, and then 2-3 seconds, boom!
We're used to seeing planes.
Maybe a 20-passenger corporate jet, no markings on the side.
I saw a plane going down, big plane, commercial liner type.
And I saw this jet coming in, and it was really low, and it was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage.
This particular plane was awful low, and as we were coming down on a 395, it came across in front of us, and it was low.
Coming in at a shallow angle like it was landing right into the side of the Pentagon.
It just happened. It was really amazing.
Huge explosion.
So you actually saw the plane impact the side of the building?
Yes, I did.
Just one plane?
Just one plane.
I basically made a turn too early and ended up right in front of the Pentagon on Route 27, which goes just, I didn't even know it was the Pentagon. I mean, I've grown up in this area, but I just am basically never over there. Besides, you can't really tell it's five-sided anyway, so I didn't even know it was the Pentagon. But I was just in traffic. My main focus was that I was late for this service, and we were stuck in totally standstill traffic, just sitting dead still on the highway. And basically, without warning, there was just the sensation of something coming over the top of us. It seems the plane was so low that it hit a light pole that was just on the edge of the highway, on the far side there. Before it came over the highway, it clipped this pole, which I heard ended up being knocked over and hitting a taxi, which was near my car.
Okay, my name is Lloyd England. 9/11, I was driving my car on my way home. This airplane flew over top of my car. It was real close. Something, glass, a loud noise happened, and the pole came through the dashboard, right through the car. I stopped the car in the middle of the street. It didn't stop straight, it stopped at an angle. As far as the plane went through, it didn't come back in until I stopped the car and got out. Then I looked for the plane. There was no plane, but it was quiet. If had nobody seemed to have indicated where something happened, I wouldn't have known. And I was there. I mean, I'm there. And the plane, the wing spread would have been from that house, maybe halfway in my house. And the big wing, the big motors underneath of them. And nothing was left out?
Those that think a 757 did not hit are fueled by the damage to the building and lack of large structural debris outside, particularly The lack of damage from the wings and vertical stabilizer, and the fact that those objects, as well as the engines, were never fully recovered.
Is there anything left of the aircraft at all?
First of all, the question about the aircraft, there are some small pieces of aircraft visible from the interior during this firefighting operation I'm talking about, but not large sections. In other words, there's no fuselage sections and that sort of thing.
They said it was a plane, and I didn't see any pieces of any plane, and I couldn't believe that a plane hit the building.
There are numerous parts to a 757 that are virtually indestructible. To date, we have not seen a single piece positively identified as Flight 77's. The fact that an exit hole inside the Pentagon is not explained by any official report on the attack. The fact that there was no impact damage on the lawn. And the fact that out of the videos that have been released, none of them clearly show a 757. The outer wall will collapse 20 minutes later, leaving a hole approximately 70 feet wide. What hit the building may be important. However, our focus should be on why it was hit in the first place. The section hit was the headquarters of Naval Operations, Naval Intelligence, and the Navy Command Center. Army personnel were also killed. A number of accountants and budget analysts were also present at the time and killed in the attack. The Arlington County After Action Report states that important budget information was in the damaged area. It's interesting that 24 hours prior, Donald Rumsfeld publicly made this announcement.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
According to the 9/11 Commission report, the military was unprepared for the transformation of commercial aircraft into weapons of mass destruction.
Counterterrorism forecaster Marvin Citron authored a report in 1994 for the Department of Defense, warning of Washington's vulnerability to terrorist attack.
We predicted a plane could have crashed into the Pentagon. That's about as specific as you can be. If you made a right turn at the Washington Monument, you could hit the Pentagon. A left turn, you could hit the White House.
Back on October 24th, 2000, the Pentagon conducted MASCAL, a mass casualty exercise which simulated the impact of a Boeing 757 into the building.
I'm very curious, and as time goes by, it makes you more curious as you have time to dwell on the details and all the information that's becoming available. I can't drive my car that well, but I can't imagine somebody just climbing behind the wheel of an airplane and doing what they did and doing it so well. Basically, it was the strangest day I've ever spent in my entire life. It was like in slow motion. I get chills every time I hear the audio. Physically, I swear I get chills every time I watch the video. I can feel the heat. I can smell the fuel, or I can smell the burning. There's been a lot of curiosity, I think, in time, and even for me, who was there. I still have questions of, did I really see what I think I saw? You know, when you're led to believe and you think you believe what you think you saw, I think that you begin to buy into it. But the more you dwell on it and the more the evidence comes forward, the questions get larger and larger and larger. I'd like some conclusion. I mean, I'm sure the families would, and I'm sure the military knows a lot more than we do in the government. But I'm just astounded that they don't share more of the information that's available.
If the government was 100% forthcoming and wanted to squelch any doubt as to what happened, why have they controlled the evidence so strongly? Why is there no positive identification of Flight 77? Why, when Vice President Dick Cheney was aware of an incoming aircraft up to 50 miles away, were employees allowed to remain in the building? Had a single alarm gone off inside the Pentagon, 125 people would be alive today, and hundreds more would not be suffering.
And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
Norman Minetta's testimony would be completely unreported by the 9/11 Commission. It would also be censored from the online archives of Commission hearings. A spokesperson from the National Archive claimed that it was a technical snafu. The 9/11 Commission will later conclude that Vice President Dick Cheney did not reach the bunker until 9:58.
My main concern is that in your testimony, you stated that Vice President Dick Cheney came into the POEC office at 9:20 when you arrived, and he was already there. He's gone in front of Meet the Press, and he said that he was there at 9:38.
They did that because they'd received a report that an airplane was headed for the White House.
This is Flight 77, which had left Dulles.
Flight 77. It left Dulles. As best we can tell, they came initially at the White House.
The plane actually circled the White House?
Didn't circle it, but was headed on a track into it.
Tracking it by radar.
And when it entered the danger zone and looked like it was headed for the White House was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement. The plane obviously didn't hit the White House, turned away and we think flew a circle and came back in and then hit the Pentagon.
Yeah, the 9/11 Commission report puts him there at 9:58 that morning.
9:58?
Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but it puts him half an hour later. So I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but to the best of your recollection, was Vice President Dick Cheney already there at 9:20?
The flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon. This was
before
American Airlines went into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Norm Mineta was in the bunker with Cheney, and so the fact that wasn't in the 9/11 Commission report was rather odd, don't you think? Yeah. Who was that young man? Did anybody ask who that young man was?
How could Dick Cheney, or anyone in the administration, especially after an aide warned him a plane was 50 miles out and 2 planes had already struck the World Trade Center, allow the Pentagon to be struck?
You know, am I prepared to believe that Dick Cheney would be capable of knowing about this kind of attack on the Pentagon, for example, and allowing it to happen? Well, from what I know about Dick Cheney, yeah.
According to the official story of the 11th of September, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. This rare footage shows the scene immediately after the impact, an hour before the entire structure collapsed. As you can see, it is a rather unusual scene. One would reasonably expect to see something of this sort. That is to say, pieces of the airplane, suitcases, debris everywhere, just like every other air crash on land. Instead, there is no substantial visual evidence of debris.
I have been on some accident investigation sites in the Air Force, and I have never come across any accident scene where there's no telltale evidence of the airplane that crashed. Here we have airplane sites, crash sites, that give zero evidence.
Where did the airplane go? Did it break up against the wall of the Pentagon? If it had done so, thousands of parts of the plane should have been scattered all over the disaster zone.
You know, things like engines and landing gears, brakes and tires are very difficult to destroy. Very difficult, because they're made out of very high-tempered steel, and I don't believe the airplane could be made to go fast enough to pulverize those things. I've never seen that happen before. You look around, there's a 16-foot hole for an airplane that's 100 and some feet wide.
According to the official story, the American Airlines Boeing 757 disappeared inside this hole. Can you see it? 5 meters. I repeat, 5 meters in diameter. Let's make some calculations. A Boeing 757 is, including its wingspan of course, 38 meters wide. And including the rudder or the tail fin, it is 13.5 meters high. To get all of this huge aircraft into a hole 5 meters wide seems rather implausible to me. In this picture, we can see a row of windows on this side and another row on that side. They should have been smashed and destroyed by the wings, and instead they're intact. These windows aren't even broken. For years, the military refused to answer the questions of an increasing number of people who rejected the official version. When the French journalist Thierry Meyssan published the book The Incredible Lie, utterly surreal explanations were put forward to shut the detractors up. One of these maintained that the airplane had been vaporized by the speed and the force of the crash. One very strange thing that doesn't make sense is the disappearance of various components of this Boeing. For example, the two engines. And what about the plane's wings? Where did they go? Had they been gasified? Instead, we are told the fuselage remained intact, and it smashed through the whole outer wall of the Pentagon and emerged through the other side, destroying a number of columns. The most solid part of the airplane is, without any doubt, the engines. In fact, these engines are made of a titanium steel alloy. It is so tough that it doesn't even melt at 3,000 degrees centigrade. Well now, in this wall we should be able to see, if nothing else, the holes made by the two engines that smashed into it. No, there is no sign of them. The two holes that we'd expect to see are not there.
And there's no indication of the wings hitting anything at the Pentagon, like you had at the North Tower. You can see the outline of the aircraft, the 25-degree bank angle. You can clearly see the outline of the number 1 engine, fuselage, and number 2 engine. It's a 25-degree bank. The wing dihedral is up in flight, and you can clearly see the outline of that airplane. But you can't find anything like that in the Pentagon. You can't find anything like that in the Pentagon.
These inconsistencies have created more and more difficulties for the proponents of the official version. So, while the military kept silent during this debacle, various photos of airplane debris found on the external lawns and along the supposed route of the airplane within the building started appearing in newspapers and on the web.
Va bene, niente gassificazione.
Very well, they admitted there was no gasification, but another theory was immediately put forward. It suggested that in order to enter a hole 5 meters wide, at a certain moment, the airplane somehow closed up its wings, just as dragonflies do. The plane entered the hole. Oh look, there they are. The engine and the other pieces of the plane were found there.
One of my experiences in the Army was being in charge of the Army's imagery interpretation for scientific and technical intelligence during the Cold War. I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon. The plane does not fit in that hole. So what did hit the Pentagon? What hit it? Where is it? What hit it? Where is it? What's going on?
General Arnold, that very morning, immediately after that alleged impact, ordered one of his fighter pilots to fly over and down to the Pentagon to look and see what he saw and to report back to General Larry Arnold himself.
At that time, Major General Larry Arnold was Commander of Aviation at NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, in charge of protecting the United States and Canada.
His fighter pilot reported back to him that there was no evidence, zero evidence, of an impact of a plane at the Pentagon.
visto che
Since the Pentagon possessed 86 separate and complete video recordings of the incident, why didn't they show some whole portions of them to those people who had doubts about it?
The FBI was immediately at the scene and took the surveillance tapes and confiscated 86 videotapes, both in the Pentagon parking lot, in the gas station, across the freeway from the Pentagon, in a nearby hotel, in all kinds of buildings that had their cameras trained in that general area.
For a long time, the military authorities refused to release the footage of Flight 77's impact. But in 2006, the United States Department of Defense was forced to yield to Freedom of Information requests, and it released 4 video sequences. The video evidence from the Pentagon's Citgo gas station and the nearby Sheraton Hotel are of no use. But 2 samples of video footage captured from the Pentagon's parking lot have been offered to the world as definitive proof of Flight 77's impact with the Pentagon. They're almost identical.
Jet engines don't emit white smoke. You have some white smoke would come out of the aft end of whatever kind of vehicle. Quite frankly, there's not enough in those photographs to tell exactly what it was, but you can tell what it wasn't. And it didn't have the size as compared, if it was a real 757-200, it would be much bigger than the vehicle we do see in the picture.
With the best will in the world, can you see an airplane here? The Pentagon tells us you cannot see the airplane because, unfortunately, it passed between one frame and the next. One frame and the next. So where is the aeroplane? According to FBI agent Jacqueline Maguire, as you can see in this affidavit, only one camera took pictures of the scene, and those are the frames that we've already seen. The story of how this airplane is supposed to have got there is absolutely absurd. One cannot imagine how, in order to get down to the height of the Pentagon wall, it was able to make a 270-degree turn at a speed of approximately 800 kilometers per hour.
That is a really difficult maneuver. And what I will say to you is that an experienced pilot with thousands of hours probably would have to take between 10 and 20 attempts. Skilled, thousands of hour pilot, probably 10 or 20 times before they would be able to pull off that maneuver. 757 is not designed to do that. 757 is designed to be basically a cruise ship in the sky. It's not acrobatic. So you just can't do that with one of those big airplanes. The air traffic controllers at the Dulles Approach Control, when they saw this target come in and make this turn, they said, oh, that's a fighter. Because military fighters can do that, okay? And military fighters with autopilots and being flown remotely, they have the structural capability. They are designed to be able to be that acrobatic.
Absurdity of absurdities. There is also the height at which this aeroplane was flying to be explained. It is supposed to have followed the lie of the land at 6 meters from the ground for 1 kilometer, managing also to jump over a hill. Then it went over a roadway, and it finally got there without making any other turns because by now there was no more space.
They have the airplane, the story has the Flight 77 was going 530 miles an hour, 460 knots. And it can't go that fast on level flight, down that low. they're up high, the true airspeed can go up, and it can go that fast, but not down low. The air is too dense.
I challenge any pilot anywhere. Give him a Boeing 757, tell him to do 400 knots 20 feet above the ground for half a mile. Can't do. It's aerodynamically impossible.
So the story of how the airplane hit the Pentagon just doesn't make any sense at all.
Identificato il pilota e anche...
After Hani Hanjour, the plane's pilot, had been identified, his flight instructor declared that his student was not even able to fly a small single-engine aeroplane.
pilotare un monomotore.
These guys didn't have the experience to make that kind of maneuver, even if the airplane could fly that.
The man could not fly at all.
There's no way you could possibly come out of a 172 and fly a jet that you've never flown before. That's like showing me how to carve up a Christmas turkey and then say, go make a heart transplant.
Ma ammettiamo pure che questo pilota così...
Even if we suppose that such an incompetent pilot had the opportunity to fly a Boeing 757, we still have to ask ourselves how he managed to violate the most heavily protected airspace in the world.
Lo spazio aereo più protetto del mondo.
No untracked aircraft get near the Pentagon and near the White House. It just doesn't happen.
In Washington, D.C., we have one of the most restricted airspaces in the world. It's called P-56. It has a separate radar tracking system and a separate military response system.
P-56 is that restricted airspace that is around the Pentagon and the White House, and it is a highly, highly, highly sensitive area. There are supposed to be no unknown aircraft that can go through there.
That has a air defense identification zone in a 50-mile radius around D.C., and then it has a protected zone 17 miles around the Washington Monument and an inner protected zone 3 miles around the Capitol. That space is essentially unbreachable. It has to be because of the importance of the buildings there.
It's like an aviation no man's land. Nobody goes in there. Nobody.
They have F-16 and F-18 jets at Andrews Air Force Base, about 10 miles south of D.C. They also have the 113th National Guard Air Wing at Anacostia Naval Air Station that can send scrambler jets up in a very short period of time. Both are in place that day. Neither one responds at all until after the Pentagon is hit. In addition to that, the Pentagon has its own defenses.
If a plane, any kind of a plane, was coming in towards the Pentagon, why didn't the anti-aircraft missile batteries that are there, why didn't they fire to protect the building? This is, after all, the most heavily protected building on the planet. That craft had to have been a military craft, because only the military craft put out a signal. It's called an Identify Friend or Foe IFF device. And only the military craft would be allowed to approach the building.
The two radar systems that the military radars, defensive radar systems, read are a civilian transponder and a military transponder. Military transponder is called IFF. Civilian aircraft do not have an IFF transponder. They are not given that capability. Okay? So if there was a 757, American 757, that went into the Pentagon, for example, and it shut off its transponder, it didn't have a military IFF transponder on it. So it was a primary target. It's a primary target going into that airspace. Should have been shot down.
What I'm describing to you is a breakdown in standard operating procedure by FAA, NORAD, P-56, and the Pentagon, all on the same day, in the middle of, after 9/05, what was known nationally to be a terrorist attack. And it makes no sense.
Nobody goes in there.
This is, after all, the most heavily protected building on the planet.
It just doesn't make any sense at all.
The Pentagon symbolizes our military power in the world. And they had hit it. And to this day, nobody knows what they hit it with, whether it was an airplane or whether it was a missile. And our government will never tell us. We just wait for the French to explain it.
What hit it? What's going on?
There is nobody anywhere at any point in this entire investigation that has said that is positively American 77. They suppose it, they presume it, they assume it, they say this is what we think it is.
The controller, Daniel O'Brien, who saw the unidentified blip coming in from the west at a high rate of speed, had no way of knowing what it was because the primary was a primary return only. The secondary radar, the transponder, was turned off.
In order to identify a primary radar target, you have to have two-way communications between the pilot and the air traffic controller, and the pilot has to report over a certain geographical location, or you have to be able to tell the pilot in the airplane to make a series of turns, and then the radar controller can look at all of the primary targets on his or her radar scope and say, there's an aircraft, or there's a target that just executed the turns I told. Now I can positively identify the aircraft. That never occurred. It's huge.
Now, if Flight 77 really did go off of the radar screen for 36 minutes, according to her testimony, then the airplane was no longer flying, or it was low enough that it was out of radar coverage. One of the two. So, was the airplane landed at some place, some remote field? Then it does make sense that they lost the airplane for 36 minutes. But other than that, there's very little explanation for that.
In the light of what we've seen and heard, it seems that the official version of 9/11 is not sufficient. We want the facts to be explained to us, and above all, we want them to be properly investigated. Basically, we want someone to finally tell us the truth.
The United States government spends $892 billion per year to defend its citizens and its territory. It is the best protected country in the world, as President Bush has said. Nevertheless, on the 11th of September, the heart of America was attacked from the sky, and 3,000 helpless American citizens were killed in their own cities.
If I had been sitting on that committee, the congressional committee examining 9/11, the one question that they could not get the Air Force to answer correctly, NORAD, was why the fighter planes did not go up automatically when the first planes were found to be hijacked.
Anytime an airliner goes off course or loses radio communication or loses its transponder signal, anytime any one of those three things happen, the aircraft is supposed to be intercepted. On 9/11, all three of those things happened, and still there was no intercept. Those planes flew around for from 20 minutes to an hour and a half without ever being intercepted.
We have direct contacts with our air defense colleagues by means of direct connections that are controlled by this touchscreen apparatus. By pressing just one key here, the call is sent, to which the operator of the defense, in this case, answers directly. In the time it takes to answer the telephone call, around 2 to 3 seconds, the information can be already exchanged. So why weren't the 4 hijacked planes intercepted and shot down? Military jets travel much faster than passenger aircraft. It would have been easy for them to catch up the jet planes before they crashed. This airplane can reach a maximum speed of Mach 2.05. This means it exceeds twice the sound barrier. This is approximately 2,400 kilometers per hour. In In the northeast of the United States, there are as many as 16 Air Force bases. Why weren't the Boeing jets intercepted? The official story argues that air defense was informed too late.
One of the biggest lies is that the FAA guys were incompetent. When we lose an airplane, we take action. We do not sit, we do not delay, we go to protocol. Boom, 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 boom. When the air traffic controllers first saw American 11 start to lose its radio, lose its transponder, go off course, and all of these bad things that are going on, they did not take a coffee break.
67 times in that year, 2001, up till September, there had been air emergencies. They can get a plane up in from 6 to 10 minutes and scramble it, and 67 times that year in air emergencies. But there was not an instance where an air emergency went ignored for long periods of time until 9/11.
A lot of people down the road say, well, the president had to give authority to shoot aircraft down and stuff like that. That is not true. An interceptor pilot has the responsibility and the authority on his or her own to shoot down an airplane if they think the situation calls for it, and this is how it would be.
You don't have to wait for a military command. You don't have to wait for orders of any kind. That's not an option. That's the law. It's inherent in being a fighter pilot. You know that's what you have to do, unless somebody has told you to stand down.
Before 1970, we had one form of scrambling aircraft, and it was immediate, bang, bang, bang. Then in the 1970s, we had some hijackings come into our civil airspace, and that wasn't a quick response. What we did in that is we didn't want the hijackers to know that we were there, so we didn't rush the fighters off the ground, and we kind of snuck them up behind the aircraft. So we put a second protocol in, and the reason that the hijacking protocol is slow is because you had to get Pentagon approval before you could release your fighters. Those two type of protocols lasted until June 1st, 2001, 3 months before 9/11. In June of 2001, Rumsfeld and the Pentagon and the military changed the procedures, and instead of having two protocols, one fast, one slow, they went to one protocol, slow. If we had reacted to the in-flight emergency immediately, the fighters would have been up and on the way, and those aircraft would never, ever have reached their targets. But when the center controllers came to notifying the military, okay, because they had only one protocol to work with, that protocol went through the Pentagon. Guess what? Guess who didn't answer the phone? Sorry, it was the Pentagon. Here's an analogy that I can give that would help out the common person here. What Rumsfeld did is the fire call comes into the fire station, but before the fire truck gets a chance to leave, it has to call the mayor of the city to get approval for that departure. And what if the mayor is out for breakfast or he's sleeping late and he doesn't answer the phone?
Look carefully at this footage, shot just a few minutes after the attack on the Pentagon. Notice the man that is helping to carry a casualty. It is the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. What is he doing here when, as head of the defense of the whole nation, and whilst the United States is still under attack, he is helping tend to the wounded? Why is he not at his command post?
The phone calls went to the Pentagon. It went through the military, and the military was sitting there saying, oh, "Don't answer, don't answer that phone, whatever it might be." Now, how would you like your fire department to sit there and say, "Well, I'm sorry, we can't come and put your house out and save your lives because the mayor didn't say so"? And on 9/12, they changed the protocols again back to the first protocol, which was the fast scrambles, and that's what it is today. So the way that Rumsfeld's Pentagon managed this whole thing is they switched gears, okay? They switched out of having two fast and slow into slow, okay? And then said, oh, we're bad, 9/12, let's go fast again.
When the United States was attacked without warning at Pearl Harbor, after 8 inquiries, General Walter Short, commander of the Army for the Defense of Hawaii, and Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, were both charged with negligence and summarily dismissed. But after the 9/11 catastrophe, nobody, neither the Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, nor the head of civil aviation, nor that of air defense, was either punished or removed from office.
On September 10th, Brigadier General W. Montague Winfield asked Junior Officer Captain Charles Leidig to temporarily replace him as Director of Operations at the Pentagon Command Center from 8:30 a.m. on September 11th. Later that day, after Flight 93 was reported crashed, Winfield resumed control. Captain Leidig had only just completed a course qualifying him to run the command center. On September the 11th, Brigadier General David F. Worley Jr. was commander of the Andrews Air Force Base, the nearest one to the Pentagon. On September the 11th, Richard B. Myers, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the absence of Chairman Shelton, was the temporary head of all U.S. Armed Forces.